So as you hear about the pharmaceutical industry complaining that they're being treated unfairly and unconstitutionally, and this is a Robin Hood project that takes from the rich and gives to the poor, it's nonsense. It's their defense that they've mounted to preserve every dime that they can currently make. And one of the biggest reasons that we are unable to solve this problem is because from the 2020 election cycle, 2/3 of our legislators receive money from the drug companies. And it's fairly evenly divided between Republicans and Democrats. This is not a partisan issue. The Republicans and Democrats take money from the drug industry and are influenced by money from the drug industry. So to wrap up here, how do we go forward? The first step is to accept pharma's true role in society. If we spend our time complaining about pharma being pharma being greedy, or pharma not being a good citizen, we're wasting our time. Their job is to maximize their profits. And complaining that they're greedy is like complaining that leopards have spots. That's who they are. That's what they do. That's their mission in society. So we've got to understand that that's their mission. It is their mission. It's not going to change. They're not going to have some kind of spiritual revelation where they should be public health minded, not profit minded. It's not going to change. So what we need is guardrails on what their primary mission is. Without guardrails, we're not going to get anywhere. But here is the problem. Pharma has relationships with the medical journals. We talked about buying the reprints, with nonprofit organizations like the Alzheimer's organization touting Leqembi, the new drug that was approved last year for Alzheimer's disease, or statins, or expensive insulins with the American Diabetes Association. Pharma has ties with the drug advocacy groups. So when you hear the Alzheimer's organization is recommending that people get examined by their doctors for early Alzheimer's so they can be treated with this new drug Leqembi, which is certainly of questionable value. The Alzheimer's organization is getting money from pharma, and they're influencing the guidelines. And they now pay 65% of the budget of the FDA is now paid for by pharma in the prescription drug user fee agreement. And the academic medical centers and the researchers are dependent on pharma money for research money. So what we've got is a classic market failure in the development and dissemination of our healthcare, air quotes, knowledge. And a market failure, market failure is a stable situation, because each of the two parties in each of these relationships is making money. So they don't want to give up their advantageous relationships. For a market failure, you need outside government to intervene. And yet we have no way of doing that. We don't have a federal health board that can intervene. So if healthcare is going to be successful, it's got to include restoring epidemiological balance to medical research. That's number one, because if we want to prevent heart disease, 80% of our efficacy is going to be in changing lifestyles, and no more than 20%, and we can talk about it, but much less than 20%, in my opinion, is due to medical therapy. It must include ensuring the accuracy and completeness of the evidence base in clinical care, which requires transparent review of articles and transparent review of guidelines. Guidelines have to have the patient care data, the raw data. It involves implementing a health technology agency, because American doctors are when they try to decide which drugs are best for their patients, they're essentially playing pin the tail on the donkey. It's the articles that are published that have not been transparently peer reviewed. It's the marketing that goes on. It's the collection of the articles into clinical guidelines that inform the doctors, but none of it's based on an independent analysis of the actual research. And then the final thing is control of the price of drugs. And again, we need to control the price of drugs because we're just spending too damn much money. But that's not the big issue. The big issue is that the excessive profitability of the drugs fuels this marketing machine that creates the use of expensive drugs in the United States at such a higher rate than in the other countries. And then finally, to achieve meaningful reform, we need to require that doctors have adequate information and that doctors acknowledge that they don't now and that they can't function as learned intermediaries. That's a big ask for doctors to acknowledge that, but it's time to do that. And I would hope that any doctors listening would read my recent book, Sickening, and that you folks, non-doctors who are listening to this, loan your doctors a copy of the book because they don't understand. They're not acting. I've seen a doctor act in bad faith, but very few are acting in bad faith. They're acting in compliance with what they've been taught good doctors do, and they don't understand because the data is not accessible to them. It's only accessible in court, and it rarely leaks out of court. They don't understand that they're being hoodwinked, and they've got to understand that if there's going to be any change. So true reform is going to require a coalition that includes the public, and that's you, healthcare professionals, and businesses that purchase health insurance for their employees. None of these reforms can happen until the political influence of the manufacturer's financial resources is controlled, is curtailed, and until the coalition of healthcare professionals, government officials, and most importantly, the public understand that coming together into a coalition to straighten out our healthcare is the only way that we can make progress. And that coalition has to become more powerful than the power and money of the drug industries. Now, you may say that's wishful thinking, and it is, but it did happen in the United States in the post-World War II years when we were growing economically, when the fruits of that growth were distributed equally to working class people and upper middle class people and the wealthy. And John Kenneth Galbraith said so poetically that there were countervailing forces that controlled the tendencies of big business to exploit their power. And the countervailing forces at that point were unions and government. Now, we have little faith in government, and the unions have been weakened. But there was a time, it was a golden era of capitalism in the United States, the 3 decades or so after World War II, where the economy grew and all Americans benefited. There was racial discrimination, there was sexual discrimination, but everybody benefited. But it's going to take all of us who understand these problems to become activists so that there is a big enough countervailing force to curtail the natural tendencies, profit-seeking tendencies of the drug companies. Now, I want to finish with a little ancient history. This is the crest of the Royal Society of London. It was adopted in 1662. This is 30 years after Galileo was sentenced to life imprisonment. It was home incarceration, but life imprisonment for writing a book that showed, by using a new scientific tool, the telescope, that the Earth was not the center of the universe. And for this, the church sentenced him to incarceration for the rest of his life. A mere 30 years later, the Royal Society was formed in London and formed by the scientists who were now doing real science without the fetters of the church telling them what they could and couldn't do. And Robert Boyle was one of the leading scientists. He developed the scientific analysis of the pressure that's generated when water boils and is turned into steam, and that became the steam engine. Soon thereafter, Isaac Newton became a member of the Royal Society. But the reason why I bring this up is because that crest says nullius in verba. And nullius in verba means take nobody's word for it. In other words, they would not be subject to the authority of the church. They would only be subject to the principles of good science. But here we are, almost 4 centuries later, and we have reverted so that now our so-called science is subject to the authority of the financial markets and not to the authority of good independent science. And this is what we have to regain if we're going to fix American healthcare. So I thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to your questions.